The colony ship drifted through the asteroid field like a wounded beast searching for shelter. And Captain Lisa Morgan knew they were running out of time and options and fuel and hope all at once, because the distress signal had been broadcasting. For 3 days now, with no response from any nearby vessels or stations or outposts in this forgotten corner of space, where nobody wanted to venture anymore after the wars. The crew of the merchant vessel Wanderer had voted to ignore the signal, because everyone knew that distress calls in the Outer Rim were usually traps set by pirates or worse, and Lisa had almost agreed with them until her scanner picked up something unusual about the signal pattern, because it was not standard military, code, or civilian emergency protocol, but something else entirely, and something about it made her chest tighten with a feeling she could not name. Against the advice of her first officer and best friend Amy Carter, who had served with her for 8 years through raids and close calls and near misses that should have killed them both, Lisa ordered the ship to change course and investigate the source of the transmission, and as they approached the coordinates, she saw it floating in the darkness, like a broken toy discarded by some careless giant hand. The escape pod was small and damaged with scorch marks along its hull, and a crack running down one side that leaked precious atmosphere into the void. And through the tiny viewport, Lisa could see movement inside, and her heart began to race because whoever was in there was still alive somehow against all odds and reason. Amy brought the pod into the cargo bay using the magnetic grapples while Lisa suited up and prepared for whatever she might find inside, because you never knew what horrors space could create, or what desperate creatures might be lurking behind sealed doors and hatches and emergency airlocks that had seen too much violence. When the bay pressurized, and Lisa approached the pod, she heard it through her helmet speakers, and the sound made her freeze in place because it was crying. And not the crying of an adult, but the soft, heartbroken sobbing of a child who had given up hope of rescue, or comfort, or ever seeing home again. She opened the hatch carefully with her tools, and her hands were shaking because she had seen terrible things in her 15 years traveling the stars, but nothing had ever prepared her for what she found huddled in the corner of that tiny metal coffin. The girl was small and fragile-looking, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, and large dark eyes that held more pain than any child should ever know, and her hair was white like fresh snow and moved slightly as if stirred by an invisible breeze, and she wore torn clothing that might have been elegant once, but was now stained with things Lisa tried not to think about. The child looked up at Lisa with those impossibly large eyes and made a sound that was not quite words, but Lisa understood it anyway, because fear and hope sound the same in every language across every world and every species that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. Lisa removed her helmet, slowly, and smiled the way her mother had smiled at her when she was small, and afraid of the dark and the monsters she imagined lived in the closet and under the bed, and she spoke softly and gently, even though she knew the child probably could not understand her words. "Come here, sweetie, and nobody is going to hurt you anymore because you are safe now, and I promise I will protect you no matter what, and whoever left you out here is never going to touch you again." The girl stared at her for a long moment and then slowly reached out one small hand with 4 delicate fingers instead of 5, and Lisa took it carefully and felt how cold the child was and how she trembled like a leaf in a storm, and she pulled her close and wrapped her jacket around those thin shoulders. Amy was waiting outside the cargo bay with medical supplies and concern written all over her face, and when she saw the child, her expression changed to something between shock and fury, because Amy had 2 daughters back on Earth Station, and the thought of any child suffering like this made her want to hurt someone badly. They took the girl to the medical bay and scanned her, and discovered she was suffering from malnutrition and dehydration and exposure, and several partially healed injuries that made Lisa clench her fists so hard her nails cut into her palms, and she had to step outside for a moment to breathe and collect herself. Over the next few days, the child, who Lisa named Hope because she refused to give up, despite everything, began to recover physically, and she followed Lisa everywhere with those huge watchful eyes and flinched whenever anyone moved too quickly or raised their voice even slightly, through careful observation and simple drawings and patience. Lisa learned that Hope belonged to a species called the Velen, who were rare and valuable in certain black market circles because their bodies produced a substance that could extend human life by decades, and there were people who would pay fortunes for even a single Velen child. The escape pod had come from a smuggler ship that was transporting Hope and others like her to buyers on the outer colonies when their vessel was attacked by something bigger and meaner, and the smugglers had abandoned their cargo to save themselves and left the children to die in the wreckage floating through space. Lisa felt sick when she realized how close Hope had come to never being found, because the pod life support had less than 6 hours remaining when they pulled her aboard. And if Lisa had listened to her crew and ignored that signal, then Hope would have died alone and afraid in the darkness between stars. Amy discovered through her network of contacts that Hope's family had been killed in a raid 3 months earlier, and she was the last of her line, and there was nowhere safe to take her because the Velen homeworld had been destroyed in the wars, and the few survivors were scattered across the galaxy with no central government or protection. Lisa made a decision that night while Hope slept curled up in her bunk, clutching a stuffed animal that Amy had replicated for her, and she gathered her crew in the galley and told them her plan. We are keeping her because I will not hand this child over to authorities who will put her in some facility where she will never be safe and where people will see her as a commodity instead of a person, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can leave at the next port. The crew looked at each other, and Lisa saw calculation in some eyes and doubt in others, but Amy stood up first and said she was staying, and then the engineer stood, and then the pilot, and one by one every member of her small crew chose to stay and protect the child who had no one else. The first few weeks were hard because Hope had nightmares every night and would wake up screaming in a language Lisa did not understand, and she would run to Lisa's quarters and climb into bed beside her, and Lisa would hold her and whisper nonsense until the shaking stopped. Lisa learned that Hope was intelligent beyond her years and picked up human language with startling speed, and within a month she could speak basic English and understand complex conversations, and she asked questions constantly about everything she saw and experienced. The crew fell in love with Hope one by one because she had a laugh like bells ringing, and she would draw pictures for them of worlds she remembered from before the bad times, and she would sit in the engine room with the engineer and hand him tools and ask how everything worked. But danger was never far away because word spread through the underground that a Velen child had been seen on a merchant vessel in the Outer Rim, and there were people who wanted to collect the bounty that certain buyers had placed on any Velen survivor. Lisa had to become harder and meaner than she had ever been before because she fought off 2 attempted boardings in as many months, and she made it clear through certain channels that anyone who came for Hope would die, and she would make sure their death was neither quick nor painless. Amy taught Hope how to defend herself, because even though she was small, she needed to know how to survive. And Hope proved to be a fast learner with reflexes that seemed almost supernatural and an ability to sense danger before it arrived. Years passed, and Hope grew taller and stronger, though she would always be small by human standards, and she became part of the crew in ways that went beyond just living on the ship, because she belonged there in a way Lisa had never belonged anywhere in her life. Hope called Lisa Mom one day without thinking about it, and Lisa felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed in front of anyone, because she had never wanted children and had never thought she would be any good at raising one. But somehow this strange, beautiful child had become the center of her universe. When Hope turned 16 by human standards, she told Lisa she wanted to become a pilot like her and fly her own ship someday and explore the galaxy and find others like herself who might be hiding in the shadows afraid to show their faces. Lisa knew that day would come, but it still hurt to think about, and she agreed to teach Hope everything she knew about flying and fighting and surviving in a universe that often seemed designed to crush anything beautiful or gentle or kind. The story spread across the outer colonies about the human captain who found an alien child and raised her as her own, and fought off anyone who tried to take her, and it became something of a legend, whispered in bars and trading posts and pirate dens. Some said Lisa Morgan was a fool who would get herself killed over nothing, and others said she was the bravest person they had ever heard of, and that if humanity had more people like her, maybe the galaxy would be